Kumihimo time again, and this time we are talking threads and cords that you can use. Now we're going to talk about some of the super inexpensive ideas through the more high fashion and more expensive ideas, but that produce absolutely gorgeous results. So we'll talk about a lot of different materials, everything from threads and cords to suedes and silks and all manner of things. So if you're ready, let's get started talking Kumihimo threads. This first one is something that many of us have around the house, and that is either embroidery floss or pearl cotton. This first one was made with both embroidery floss and pearl cotton. This one is just embroidery floss. This one is embroidery floss with some metallic included, metallic embroidery floss. And then this one, the colored portions are embroidery floss and the black portions are something else that I'll talk about later. But these are some, things that you have around the house. They're inexpensive to get started, so it's a great introduction to Kumihimo. The one thing that I will say is try to get the best embroidery floss or pearl cotton that you can. For example, this one was kind of an off-brand, and it just doesn't seem to have the same kind of shine that the good stuff has. So best use for this is, I think, just about anything. You can start off with this, or you can use the good stuff, so to speak, to make some lovely necklaces or bracelets. This is something else that a lot of us have around the house, and this is just yarn. So this is just simple yarn. The one thing to watch out for is that yarn comes in various thicknesses. Everything from like baby fine, I think lace weight, up through super bulky. So depending on what weight of yarn you use, that will depend on how big your Kumihimo braid ends up being. This, I think, was a light worsted weight. So it's a medium fine, I guess you'd want to call it, or medium. If you decide to use yarn and you want to use something either super bulky or an art yarn, I've got something like these. These are made from Sari silk yarn. So you can see that yarn comes in many forms. I'll talk more about the Sari silk a little bit later, but again, yarn is something great if you just want to go ahead and experiment with Kumihimo. These next samples were made with satin cord, also called Rattail commonly. There are many different thicknesses. For example, this one I think is probably a stiff 2 millimeter, while this one is way, way, way smaller. It is 1 millimeter. So you can see that, yeah, size does make a difference. But the advantage to the satin cord is it's relatively inexpensive, comes in a lot of colors. It's nice and soft usually. Depending on the quality of the cord, it can be very soft or it can be stiffer. And you can use it for multiple techniques, flats, rounds, etc. And it's really just an all-around pretty option. If you would like something that's a little more upscale than the embroidery floss or the yarn. Now this next step is silk or rayon. For example, this one was made with some rayon embroidery floss. So it's nice and soft and supple, and it has a beautiful sheen to it. Now I made this with a few different weights of it. For example, I used a lot more of the pink color than I used of the other colors, but we'll get into that at a later time. Here's something made with, again, some silk embroidery floss, or rayon, I should say. And this one was actually made with silk threads. And this one, it just feels wonderful. I wish you could reach out and touch it. This feels so nice. So these are usually readily available. The rayon embroidery floss is usually can be found at the big box stores. The silk thread you can find online a lot of times, and they're just a whole lot of fun to use, and they work up beautifully. Let's go on to the next one. This next one is something you may or may not have around the house, and it is hemp cord. So you can also see some cotton cord, macrame cord sometimes it's called. So you can use this to make braids. It is a little stiffer and it doesn't feel as nice and silky as the other ones do, but it's certainly something you have around the house and you want to try it. I say go for it. So again, this is hemp cord, and I believe this one is 1 millimeter cord. Here's something a little different. This is suede. So yes, I have just used, I think it's 3 millimeter suede cord, and it makes a very interesting Kumihimo braid. It's pretty pliable, so that's nice. And it's, to me, it's kind of more rustic or casual looking. So if you want something like that, it's a great deal. Just keep in mind that you're going to have some kind of open spaces in between it, unless you braid very, very tightly, which is kind of what I did at this end. So here we go. This is suede cord. Now here's some silk ribbon. So this is actually the stuff that you may see called fairy ribbons or fairy silk. There are 2 millimeter cords, but when I say cord, you know, there's nothing in between them. So this works up pretty compactly. It's beautiful to work with, but the only gotcha that you got here is the fact that for this, they generally come in 42-inch lengths. So if you want to go ahead and do something kind of longer, you're going to have to start with a tied end and not a neat end, unless you're just doing a bracelet. These don't work real well for necklaces unless you start your Kumihimo with a tied end. But these are beautiful, it's soft to work with, and they feel great. So now we're talking ribbons. This first one is going to be a silk ribbon. So the silk ribbon, this one happens to be, I believe, 4 millimeters in width. And it compacts a lot, so you're going to get a pretty thin Kumihimo braid out of it. Now the advantage is it's very soft. It feels wonderful. It really does. It's very, very pliable. You can do all kinds of things with it. You can usually find it in 10 or 30 foot spools, so you can usually get some nice longer lengths out of it. So that's one idea. Another is some satin ribbon. Now this, I just got it, I think Joann's or something. It is 9 millimeter ribbon, so it's 9 millimeters across. And it makes up for a pretty thick braid. So this is one idea. And you can see that on this end, I really didn't, actually hold on a second. It's this end that I didn't twist the braid or twist the ribbon as I was working it. I just kind of used it flat. And then towards this end, I started twisting, and you can see it compacts a little bit more compared to this end. So you can have the option of twisting or not twisting, something like this. And here's some that I used, and this is probably about the same width, but it ended up, it's almost like it's a cross between a silk and a satin. It's a satin, I mean, it's not a real silk, but it feels more silky than this and less silky than this. Honestly, I got this on Amazon. I got a ton of it for like $10. So I'm going to be making some more projects with this stuff because I think it's great. So there we go. We have ribbons. Now let's go on to our next type of thread. Now these are made with 1 millimeter Chinese knotting cord. So you can see that it's not quite the same as the Rattail satin. It has a kind of a satiny look to it, so that's nice, but it's much stiffer than like the satin ribbon. So this is great if you want something that has a little bit of body to it. Now you can also combine this. For example, I combined this 1 millimeter Chinese macrame or Chinese knotting cord, excuse me, with a 2mm satin cord. So this makes for a nice combination. And for this one, it's all, no, actually this one I did the same thing, and you can see that it has a slightly different effect because of the number of cords I used for these. So this one has a more rippled effect than this one does, or does this one. So again, this is the 1mm Chinese knotting cord. Before I go on very much further, I want to talk about mixing a little bit more. Now this is something where I took some embroidery floss and then I took some Sari ribbon or Sari yarn for this one. And you can see it has a very interesting texture. So you can use art yarns. Now be careful if you're using the Sari yarn, because believe me, this stuff sheds all over the place. So be careful for what purpose you plan to use these, but they have beautiful special effects. Now this one was a Sari ribbon instead of a Sari yarn, but again it's made from old saris and everything, and the thing with the Sari ribbon is you can get bumps in it where it's thicker or stuff. You can cut these off if you want to, but you know, just be aware that if you're going to be using something like Sari silk, you're going to have something like this happen. And in this particular one, I happen to be using 1.5mm. It's a cross between a satin and a Chinese knotting cord, but it's very nice. It's great to use, so maybe you can see it here better. But yeah, we've got this. Now, I've kind of talked about the Chinese knotting cord. Let's talk about Chinese knotting cord when it comes to beaded Kumihimo. Well, first I'm actually going to start out with a silk thread. Now this is a silk beading thread like you would use for stringing pearls or something. I believe this is a size F, so it's one of the thicker sizes. You can see how tiny of a Kumihimo braid this makes. It is very tiny. And you can see how it works. Now on this end I have some size 8 seed beads, and then I move off to the size 6 seed beads. Well, when you're using something this fine and delicate, the size 6 seed beads start losing their shape. It's even iffy for the size 8 seed beads. I think this stuff would work better for maybe a size 11 seed bead. So think about it, but this is a very, very, very fine thin braid when you make it with the beading silk thread. This next step up is made with S-Lon thread. So again, this is a kind of beading or micro macrame thread, often used with beaded Kumihimo. You can see what kind of braid it comes in. It's still a very fine braid. I'd say it's probably 3mm, maybe 4mm. But here you can see some size 8 seed beads, and here we have size 6 seed beads, and you can see that it really does help keep the shape more, because if you remember the other one, I'll show you the other one, it's very loosey-goosey, and this one has a tighter structure, and that is because the thread is thicker, and it's also stiffer. So there we go, and let me show you again the size of the braids, because it's way, way different. So, beading silk, S-Lon. Here's the 1mm Chinese knotting cord, and here we go. This is the size of the braided Kumihimo that you get. And then here we go with the actual braid. Now, if I were really doing this for something other than a demo, I would have chosen colors that more matched my beads for the size 8s, because you can see that there is definitely thread showing. Now, when we get onto the size 6 seed beads, you still see some threads, but they're much less evident. And again, if you had chosen or if I had chosen thread that matched, like a blue thread, you wouldn't even be seeing this. Now this makes for a much firmer one compared to this. So this is firmer than this, and it is way firmer than this. So when I decide to go and do this for some beaded Kumihimo projects, it's either going to be the S-Lon or it's going to be the 1mm Chinese knotting cord. I think both of them perform really well with size 6 seed beads. If I wanted to go with the size 8s, I would go with the S-Lon because I think it's a better fit. And if I wanted to do size 11 seed beads, I would go with the beading silk. Speaking of beaded Kumihimo, here's something that I did with the, let's see, it looks like embroidery floss and some 2mm Rattail satin cord. And I went ahead and strung the beads on the embroidery floss and then used the satin Rattail as an accent. And I believe I used some peanut beads on these. So you don't have to just go with plain old seed beads. You can use other kinds of seed beads. Haven't made this into a necklace yet, but yeah, I just wanted you to see the ribbons. Okay, here are 2 necklaces that I have made. This one I made with size 8 seed beads, and if memory serves me correctly, it looks like I made it with S-Lon. So this one's nice, and you know, I had a few errors here. But I topped it with some cones, and then since the length wasn't quite long enough, I just added some beads towards the end, and then the clasp, and we're good to go. So here's an idea for using some seed beads. And here's another idea for using beads. For this one, I used the Rayon embroidery floss, and I used some thicker and thinner strands of it. Now, these aren't really beads. What these are the little ball chains. And what I did is I actually made my Kumihimo braid, and then I sewed on some of the ball chain just in a spiral. So there we go, all kinds of threads and cords and whatever that you can use for Kumihimo, whether you're choosing for something that's more casual, something that's a little bit more upscale. There's all kinds of threads that you can use. Hey, question for you. If you could choose any one type of thread or cord to use, what would you choose? What would you like to experiment with if you could? Go ahead and leave me a comment down below because I'm curious to see what people would like to work with. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. More Kumihimo on the way. But meanwhile, this is Gail signing out saying have yourself a beautiful day. Bye.